I didn't pack with intention, just impulse. A half-folded cardigan, some jeans, my favorite mug, none of it carefully selected, all of it thrown into the overnight bag like I was running from something. Which, I suppose, I was. Not from danger. Just from silence. From Daniel's passive-aggressive sighs and the way he kissed my forehead like a chore. From dinners where we chewed more resentment than food. From the way we hadn't touched or really touched in months. I was tired of pretending the house we built was still a home. So I left. I didn't tell anyone. Not Daniel, not my assistant, not even my mother. I needed the escape to be clean, free of explanation or obligation. My parents' place, nestled off a quiet road just outside the city, had always been a place to exhale. No one would expect me there, and that was the point. I needed the stillness, the quiet, the comfort of old walls and familiar smells. I needed to remember who I was before everything got so tangled. The drive was long but uneventful, the kind that lets your mind wander in loops. I didn't play music. Just the hum of tires and the dull ache of questions I didn't want to answer yet. What was I doing with Daniel? When had the laughter stopped? Why did I feel more alone in bed beside him than I ever had sleeping solo? I didn't want answers, just distance. When I pulled into the driveway, something felt off immediately. The curtains in the living room fluttered slightly. Someone had just moved them. I climbed out of the car and rolled my bag behind me, the gravel crunching beneath my boots. The front door opened before I even reached the porch. My mother stood there, her smile too tight, her eyes darting behind me like she expected someone else. "Oh! What a surprise," she said, her voice syrupy but strained. "We weren't expecting company." I gave her a tired smile. "Just needed to get away. Is that okay?" She hesitated a beat too long. "Of course. It's always your home." But the words didn't land right. Something behind them was off. My father appeared next, his expression unreadable. He gave me a one-armed hug, then quickly stepped aside like he was trying not to block a view or a path. My instincts prickled. They weren't just surprised. I'd startled them. They were jittery, uneasy. Like kids caught sneaking candy before dinner. Still, I forced a smile, pretending not to notice. "I'll just take my bag upstairs." The house looked the same, but it felt different. A faint, unfamiliar perfume lingered in the hallway. Not my mother's scent. Something younger. Sharper. I shook it off and climbed the stairs, heading for my old room. I hadn't slept in it for years, but the moment I stepped inside, I was hit with a wave of nostalgia. Posters still on the wall, books on the shelf exactly where I left them. I set my bag down and wandered to the window, pulling back the curtain out of habit. And that's when I saw him. Daniel. My husband, Daniel. Sneaking out of the back door. He was moving fast, trying not to make noise as he led a woman, blonde, wearing a cropped denim jacket and a short skirt, down the back steps. They paused just long enough for her to adjust her purse before slipping past the hedge and out of view. My mind didn't register it at first. It was like watching a dream I wasn't in. A version of my life I didn't consent to. My breath caught in my throat, heart slamming against my ribs like it wanted out. I pressed my hand to the window glass to steady myself, the cold doing nothing to ground me. That was Daniel. At my parents' house. With her. Not just cheating. He brought her here. To my home. To the place I ran to for safety. To the one space that wasn't poisoned by him. And my parents, God. They were nervous when I arrived. They were not surprised. They knew. They knew. I stood frozen for a long time, my fingertips numb against the glass. My face reflected back at me, wide eyes, slack jaw, a woman watching the foundation of her life crumble without warning. But maybe that wasn't true. Maybe the cracks had always been there. Maybe I'd just stopped looking at them. A hot wave of shame crawled up my neck. Not for what he did, but for what I had tolerated. For all the times I'd swallowed my voice to keep the peace. For the excuses I'd made when he came home late or seemed distracted. For believing marriage meant endurance over honesty. I backed away from the window slowly, like I was afraid the truth would follow me. The floor creaked beneath my steps, the same floor I used to dance barefoot on as a girl. It felt like a betrayal now. I didn't cry. Not yet. I moved like someone sleepwalking back down the stairs, through the hallway, into the kitchen where my mother was stirring a pot on the stove like nothing was wrong. She looked up, gave me that same tight smile. Hungry? I was just about to. But I wasn't ready to speak. Not yet. My body felt like it was made of someone else's skin. My throat burned with unspoken rage. I turned and walked away before she could say another word, before I could hear another lie. Back in my room, I sat on the bed, hands trembling in my lap. I pulled out my phone and stared at Daniel's name in my contacts. He hadn't texted. Not a single message to ask where I was or why I left. Because he knew. Because he was here. Because he thought I wouldn't find out. He thought I wouldn't come home. But I did. And I saw everything. And now everything was about to change. My feet were numb when I walked back into the kitchen. I didn't even remember moving. My whole body was running on instinct, like a compass pointed straight at the people who were supposed to protect me, my parents. My mother stood by the stove, the kettle whistling behind her as she moved with deliberate calm, almost theatrical in her poise. My father sat stiffly at the kitchen table, flipping a newspaper he wasn't reading. Their entire performance reeked of guilt, but neither looked ashamed. I took a step closer, and my mother turned slightly, lifting the kettle to pour hot water into the same white porcelain teapot we'd used since I was a kid. Tea? She asked, as if the world hadn't just shifted beneath my feet. I didn't answer. My fists clenched at my sides. You knew, I said, my voice hoarse. Didn't you? She looked at me then, finally, and smiled, a calm, slow smile that made my blood run cold. She picked up a spoon and stirred the tea, the tiny clinking sound filling the silence between us. My father still didn't look up. Not once. I take it you saw them, she said, gently blowing the steam from her cup. I blinked. Them? She sipped slowly. Daniel and Susan. Then she lowered the cup, resting it delicately on the saucer before looking me dead in the eye. So, how do you like Susan? Is she as good in bed as my daughter? The words sliced straight through me, sharp and slow. My breath caught. My stomach lurched like the room had tilted. Did she really just say that? My mouth opened, but no sound came out. I stared at her, blinking, trying to process whether I was awake or dreaming. She didn't flinch. Didn't laugh. Just took another sip of tea like she was commenting on the weather. My father reached for his coffee mug, but his hands trembled. He still hadn't looked at me. The shame on his face was only visible in profile, and, even then, it was watered down, dulled by years of silence and enabling. You knew, I repeated, this time louder. My voice cracked like glass. You let them come here. You let them use this house like it was a hotel. She's lovely, my mother said, with the detached approval of someone reviewing a new couch. Polite. And he's still your husband, darling. Things happen in marriage. Don't be dramatic. A noise came out of me, half laugh, half sob. I felt my throat tighten and my fingers twitch like they didn't belong to me anymore. Dramatic? I hissed. You're calling me dramatic? You sat here, offering him tea and biscuits while he brought another woman into your daughter's childhood home. And you knew. She set her cup down with a soft clink. He said you two had grown apart. That you barely spoke anymore. That you were always busy, always distant. I understand how men stray. He needed comfort. Comfort? I repeated, almost choking. So you gave him mine? My mother stood slowly, smoothing her blouse as if preparing for a board meeting. This house is not a shrine to your childhood, sweetheart. You don't live here anymore. Daniel was hurting. I simply offered him space. Finally, I turned to my father. And you? Do you have anything to say? His eyes flicked up, glassy with guilt. I didn't want this, he murmured. I didn't know what to say. Your mother handled everything. I stepped back like he'd slapped me. You didn't know what to say? You let my husband cheat on me in this house, and the best you can come up with is that you were speechless. You've been distant for years, my mother interrupted. Always so ambitious. So closed off. Maybe if you'd taken better care of him. Don't you dare, I snapped. My voice boomed, shaking with fury. Don't you dare blame me for his affair. You sound just like him, always turning my success into a problem. You taught me to aim high, to work hard, to never rely on anyone. And now you punish me for it? She crossed her arms. Well, I never expected to be spoken to like this in my own home. I stared at her, stunned. Your own home. That's rich. You've made it clear this place was never really mine, was it? Just a space to mold your version of a daughter. One you could parade around when convenient and ignore when she had real feelings. She narrowed her eyes, suddenly ice. Watch your tone. No, I said. Not anymore. The room felt small, toxic, like it was closing in on me. Every inch of wallpaper, every dish on the shelf, every spoon in the drawer suddenly felt foreign. Tainted. I couldn't breathe here. I couldn't be here. I turned on my heel and stormed out. Up the stairs, past the ghost of every memory I'd once thought was sacred. My fingers fumbled with the zipper of my suitcase, and I shoved my clothes back inside, not caring if they folded right. Everything I thought was real had just burst into flames, and all I could do was gather what was left. I paused once, staring at the window again. The garden was quiet now, empty. But the image of Daniel, sneaking out with Susan like a teenager avoiding curfew, was burned into my memory. I felt cold, but not weak. Something inside me was waking up. Not grief, not despair. Something sharp, steady, resolve. As I wheeled my suitcase back down the stairs, my mother stood at the bottom, arms crossed, disappointment etched into her expression. Where are you going? I didn't look at her. Away. And don't expect me back. You're overreacting. No, I said quietly. I'm finally reacting. She didn't follow me out the door. Neither did my father. I closed it behind me with a calmness that surprised me. The wind had picked up. The sky looked heavy, like it might rain. I walked to the car, opened the trunk, tossed the bag in, and sat behind the wheel, gripping it until my knuckles ached. They betrayed me. Every single one of them. Daniel. My parents. Even the girl I used to be who thought love and family were supposed to be safe. Well, now they taught me something else. I started the engine and drove away, not looking back once. The wheels hummed like a war drum beneath me. I didn't know where I was going yet, but I knew exactly what I was going to do next. I was going to make every one of them regret underestimating me. The morning after I left my parents' house, I sat alone in a coffee shop 2 towns over, stirring a cup of black coffee I didn't even want. I hadn't slept. My body was upright, functioning, but my mind was deep in some sharp, calculated place I hadn't known existed inside me. Rage and heartbreak were too raw, too disorganized. I needed structure. Focus. I needed to stop bleeding and start building something. So I opened my laptop and typed her name. Susan. She'd smiled when she slipped out that back door, oblivious to the wreckage she'd helped ignite. I'd only gotten a glimpse of her, but it was enough. Long blonde hair, thin figure, maybe 10 years younger than me. The kind of woman people assumed was harmless until she wasn't. I didn't just want to know who she was, I wanted to understand her. Her habits. Her weaknesses. Her lies. The search began simply. Susan Halberd Marketing Firm. I remembered Daniel mentioning a new hire in passing months ago, someone he'd said was sharp but green. Now I knew what sharp meant. Flirtatious. Strategic. Opportunistic. Probably all of the above. Her LinkedIn popped up first. Marketing associate at Daniel's firm, newly hired 5 months ago. She had a carefully curated profile, bright eyes, that corporate smile women are trained to perfect, and a background in PR, Georgetown graduate. Interned at some upscale wine label in Napa. The kind of resume designed to impress at first glance and tell you absolutely nothing at second. I scrolled, clicking through every post, every connection. She had a flair for exaggeration, calling her team legendary, describing basic events like they were breaking the marketing world wide open. I checked the comments. Daniel had liked nearly all of her posts. One even had a comment, "Your ideas are always spot on. Proud to have you on board." My stomach churned. Her Instagram was locked, but her Facebook wasn't. Bingo. The photos told a different story. There she was, posing on a boat, sipping a glass of Prosecco beside a dark-haired man in sunglasses. Caption: Weekend escape with my favorite human. The comments were full of hearts, smiley faces, and one from the guy himself, counting down the days till you're back. His name was Gavin. No last name, but that was enough to start with. Another post 3 weeks ago showed her alone in a hotel lobby, dressed like she was going out. The location tagged, my city. My blood ran hot. So this wasn't a one-time mistake. She'd been coming around. Meeting Daniel. Probably in my house. The audacity made my throat dry. I clicked Gavin's profile. Private, of course, but his bio gave me something. Product engineer, now based in Portland for a 6-month client contract. So the fiancé was out of town. Perfect. I started a digital folder that minute, labeling it Susan Files like it was some courtroom evidence archive. I added screenshots, dates, photos, snippets of public interactions between her and Daniel. I cross-referenced company newsletters, identifying office parties or late-night client dinners. Each instance aligned too cleanly with the days Daniel had urgent meetings or last-minute travel. I started to see the pattern. The lies were always in the small shifts. The pause before he answered, the generic details that couldn't be traced, the lack of receipts or photos when he came back from so-called business trips. I had all the proof I needed to feel the full betrayal, but not yet enough to do anything. I needed more. I wanted to dismantle them. Neatly. Quietly. Permanently. Daniel texted me that afternoon. Daniel, where did you go, babe? Everything okay? The nerve. I stared at the message for several minutes, absorbing how smoothly he could wear the mask. Babe. Like I hadn't just caught him sneaking out the back door of my parents' home with his mistress. Me. Needed a little air. Just fell off. Taking a few days to rest. His reply came fast. Daniel, I wish you would have told me. I was just about to head out for a work trip, could have coordinated. Of course he was. A work trip. I swallowed the scream building in my throat and typed back with icy calm. Me, no worries. We'll catch up when we're both back. I watched the typing bubble appear and disappear several times. He wanted to probe. He wasn't sure if I knew. Good. Let him stew in it. The next few days became a blur of methodical obsession. I followed every crumb of Susan's online presence. I tracked her Pinterest boards, wedding dresses, honeymoon destinations, inspirational quotes about keeping it classy. The hypocrisy made me nauseous. I watched her Twitter likes, which included tweets about dating up, and men who leave their wives are just bold enough to follow their hearts. Susan wasn't just reckless, she believed she deserved this. And then I found the jackpot. A company newsletter from 2 weeks ago. Big congrats to our newest team pair, Susan Halberd and Daniel Wolf, who'll be heading our client pitch for an upcoming beauty brand expansion. There they were, named together. Traveling. Meeting late. The whole affair wrapped up in a sanitized corporate bow. I forwarded the article to myself and added it to the folder. Every time I looked at it, a new part of me crystallized. I was becoming colder. Smarter. Sharper. If Susan thought she could play games in my house, with my husband, under my nose, she had no idea what kind of player I could become. It wasn't about jealousy anymore. I didn't want him back. I didn't care what she saw in him. This was about agency. Power. If they wanted to rewrite my life without asking, then I'd take the pen and author the ending myself. The next phase required patience. I texted Daniel just often enough to appear normal. Sent the occasional, how's work, or safe travels. He answered with bland updates and winking emojis. He didn't suspect a thing. I rehearsed every message I sent to make sure it sounded just distracted enough. I even mentioned my parents, how nice it was to get away, how strange it felt being back in my old bedroom. I imagined him laughing over it with Susan, probably saying I was so busy working I barely noticed anything. Let him laugh. Let him feel secure. Because I wasn't just watching. I was planning. And when the time came, neither of them would see it coming. When I returned home, I ensured my demeanor reflected nothing of what I had uncovered. Any visible signs of anger or suspicion would have compromised the objective. I entered quietly, bringing in only a single travel bag. Daniel greeted me from the living room, pretending to be absorbed in a sports recap, the sound from the television just loud enough to create a casual backdrop. "Well, look who finally came home," he said, not looking up. "You could have told me." I stepped out of my shoes and placed my bag beside the staircase. I needed time. I didn't know how long I'd be gone. He muted the TV and turned toward me, brow furrowed in mock concern. "You okay?" I nodded. "Just tired." He stood and walked over, placing a hand on my waist. "You worried me." I didn't recoil. I allowed the contact. I even leaned into it slightly, not out of affection but as part of the reconstruction of appearances. I didn't mean to. He kissed my temple, murmured something soft, and went to the kitchen to start dinner like it was any other night. The routine resumed, surface-level civility intact. But under it all, I had shifted entirely. This was no longer a marriage. It was a crime scene I was investigating from within. I began with small, consistent documentation. Every message Daniel sent, whether via text, email, or social media, I saved and categorized. I took screenshots and forwarded them to a secure cloud account that I alone had access to. Anytime he mentioned late meetings, travel, or vague social functions, I logged the time and date in a spreadsheet labeled Cover Stories versus Reality. I cross-referenced these entries with Susan's posts and office updates. I went further. I opened our shared credit card statements and meticulously combed through each charge. On one occasion, I found a dinner at a high-end seafood restaurant neither of us had visited together. On another, I noted a luxury hotel booking under his name during a weekend he claimed to be at a conference. These entries were printed and added to a growing binder, sectioned by month, annotated with my own notes. Next, I focused on call records. Our phone plan allowed access to itemized call logs. I downloaded a full report and sorted the numbers by frequency. One unknown number appeared nearly every day, sometimes twice. I traced it using an online database. It belonged to Susan. The next phase required physical surveillance. I purchased several small, discreet home cameras online. Installation was simple. I mounted one in the corner of the hallway that faced the front door. Another went above the kitchen cabinet, camouflaged among the decor. The third I installed in the garage, angled toward where Daniel often took calls. All cameras were connected to a secure app on my phone and backed up to external storage. He didn't notice. Or if he did, he underestimated me too much to suspect anything intentional. His arrogance was a shield, and I let him hide behind it. Meanwhile, I contacted a divorce attorney. Her name was Alina Moreno, a quiet but highly competent woman referred to me by a colleague who had gone through a high-asset separation. We met in her office downtown. I handed her a red folder filled with the documentation I had already compiled. She reviewed each item with clinical precision, occasionally nodding. "You're gathering the right kind of evidence," she said. "Don't confront him." "Not yet. The more normal things seem, the stronger your position becomes when we act." "I'm not interested in reconciliation," I clarified. She met my gaze. "Then let's make sure the exit is clean and advantageous." We laid out a plan. I would continue gathering information. I would also begin separating assets discreetly, opening a private checking account, redirecting future paychecks, and pausing any contributions to shared investment accounts. We discussed potential court proceedings, including how infidelity paired with misuse of marital property could significantly sway the judgment. Back at home, Daniel continued his performance. He would ask how I was feeling, suggest watching a movie, offer to pick up takeout. I engaged only as necessary, always polite, always restrained. He seemed almost relieved that I had returned to my usual self, unaware that every move he made was being recorded, both digitally and emotionally. One evening, while he was in the shower, I accessed his laptop. He had used the same 4-digit password for years. I navigated quickly, scanning folders and browser history. There were no emails to Susan too obvious. But there were several deleted files in the recycling bin, including what looked like receipts and itinerary documents for weekend stays and travel rewards. I recovered them and saved each to a flash drive I wore around my neck, disguised as a simple necklace. I also noticed something else. A draft email he had begun to write but never sent. The recipient field was blank, and the body contained only a single sentence. "I'm trying, but she's unpredictable." I copied it. I didn't know if it was meant for Susan or someone else, but it was useful either way. My final task was internal. I adjusted how I responded to Daniel's lies. If he said he had a dinner meeting, I smiled and said, "That sounds important." If he came home late, I acted half asleep, mumbling a pleasant greeting. I never asked questions. I never raised suspicion. I let him think he was succeeding. That was the most important illusion. I practiced keeping my voice even. I tracked my facial expressions in the mirror. I tested answers allowed to anticipate how I'd respond to any inquiry. My behavior had to be flawless, calm, gentle, exactly what he expected. He didn't see the camera in the hallway recording him kiss his phone screen. He didn't realize I was logging the exact time he left and returned each night. He didn't know the game had already shifted and he was losing. The more he lied, the more data I collected. The more confident he became, the more evidence he gifted me. Soon, he would understand what it meant to be studied. And when it was time, I would take all of it, his texts, his receipts, his footage, and walk into that courtroom with everything I needed. Until then, I smiled when he made dinner. I thanked him for flowers he never bought. And I let him believe that I still trusted him. It began with a name, Gavin. Susan's fiancé. The man in the Facebook photos with his arm casually draped around her waist, unaware that while he was away chasing his career, his fiancée was slipping in and out of hotel rooms with my husband. I studied every detail I could find on Gavin. His social media footprint was careful, a bit guarded, private accounts, limited posts, but he was tagged in enough pictures to build a narrative. He was a product engineer currently stationed in Portland. Out of sight, out of reach, but not out of my plan. I created a fake identity. Nothing sloppy. I paid for a VPN, set up a new email, and constructed a whole digital presence around a woman named Elise Harrington, mid-level HR consultant, coffee lover, recent transplant to Portland. I chose a professional headshot pulled from a royalty-free image bank. Something that looked warm, but not too glamorous. Believable. Harmless. I sent Gavin a friend request. 2 days later, he accepted. Our conversation started casually. I complimented a hiking photo he was tagged in. Asked about Portland's food scene. Said I was new to town and trying to find the best brunch spots. He was polite, friendly in a reserved way. It took time, but eventually I shifted gears. "I think our worlds may have overlapped," I messaged one night. "Do you know Susan Halbert?" There was a pause in our chat. I watched the typing bubble flash on and off. "Yeah," he finally replied. "Why?" I took a deep breath and began weaving the story. I told him I worked with Susan's firm on a side project a few months ago. That I noticed some closeness between her and a married colleague. I mentioned business trips, office parties, whispered laughs by the copy machine. Then I paused. I let the silence build. He didn't reply that night. But the next morning, he messaged me again. "Are you sure?" I typed back slowly. "I'm not trying to stir anything. I just thought you should know what I observed. You deserve clarity." After that, Gavin went quiet. But I had already planted the seed. And now I moved to phase 2. While I kept that thread unraveling, I began orchestrating a trap for Daniel. He always talked about wanting a promotion. About being stuck just beneath the glass ceiling. Always one rung away from power. It made sense. He was insecure, hungry for validation, desperate to be seen as a man of influence. I knew exactly how to exploit that. So I created a fictional executive. His name was Bryce Callahan. VP of strategy at a company we both knew, a firm that Daniel had long admired and tried to network into. I built the identity carefully. A full LinkedIn profile with a premium badge, a professional headshot, mutual connections with industry people who wouldn't notice the phantom name among their long list of contacts. Then I bought a burner phone. Registered it to a generic business texting service. Bryce now had a voice and a number. From that number, I sent Daniel a message. "Bryce Callahan, Hi Daniel, your name came across my desk via a mutual connection. I've heard good things about your leadership at Lasker and Company. I'd love to have a brief conversation about some strategic openings we're considering. Daniel called back within the hour. I didn't answer. Instead, I followed up with a text, apologizing for missing the call and asking if he'd be available for a dinner meeting next week. The bait was set. To sell it further, I needed a face. I hired an actor, a clean-cut man in his early 40s, confident but not flashy. I paid him to study the fictional Bryce Callahan's background, to learn the jargon, to be convincing enough for one performance. The dinner would be the stage. But I wasn't done yet. I booked a rooftop restaurant under a private room reservation, claiming it was for a client gathering. I invited Daniel, my parents, and Susan. Then, from Elise's account, I sent Gavin a fabricated gala invitation tied to Susan's firm, suggesting he surprise her there. I even used a fake ticketing system to make it feel real. When the night arrived, the air crackled with potential. I watched Daniel dress carefully in our bedroom mirror, adjusting his tie 3 times, running a comb through his hair with practiced strokes. This dinner could change things, he said, flashing a grin that hadn't touched me in months. I smiled back. I have a feeling it will. We arrived early. I wore a sleek black dress and diamond studs. Understated, elegant, unshakable. Susan showed up 15 minutes late, clinging to her handbag like a nervous teenager on prom night. She didn't recognize Gavin's name on the event list when she checked in, but she would soon. My parents arrived just after, looking uncomfortable in formal wear. My mother barely met my eyes. My father pretended not to notice the tension in my jaw. And then, finally, Bryce Callahan appeared, sharp suit, perfect smile. He greeted Daniel with a firm handshake and a confident nod. Heard a lot about you, he said smoothly. Daniel puffed up like a peacock, eyes glowing with ambition. I've been following your work for years. It's an honor. We ordered wine. Talked business. Bryce complimented Daniel's leadership style. Mentioned confidential evaluations for strategic expansion. Daniel leaned in, hanging on every word. I watched it all unfold with clinical precision. Then came the real performance. Before we move forward, Bryce said, pulling a tablet from his briefcase, I like to know the kind of people I'm dealing with. Integrity, discretion, it matters to me. So I did some light vetting. He tapped the screen. Up popped a series of messages, texts between Daniel and Susan. Screenshots I had forwarded to the actor's account. Daniel's flirtatious remarks. Photos Susan had sent. Dinner receipts. Booking confirmations. The room went still. Daniel's face drained of color. Susan's wine glass slipped slightly in her hand. My mother whispered, "What is this?" I turned to Gavin, who had walked in moments before, silent, standing behind Susan like a storm waiting to break. He tapped her shoulder. She turned, gasped. Gavin? The explosion was set. But I didn't speak. Not yet. I just smiled gently, folded my hands in my lap, and watched it all unfold. The night of the dinner arrived with a strange, electric calm. The kind of stillness that doesn't come from peace, but from precision, the hush before a carefully drawn arrow flies. I stood in front of the mirror, sliding diamond studs into my ears and smoothing the neckline of my satin navy dress. I'd had it tailored for control, for structure, for the sharp silhouette of a woman no one would see coming. Every detail of this evening had been orchestrated down to the minute. And I was ready. Daniel was still riding the high of his big break. He hadn't stopped talking about the fictional Bryce Callahan since he received the invitation. He'd called his assistant to block off the entire week, just in case. He spent an hour deciding between ties. I watched him with the detachment of a scientist observing a mouse navigate a maze, curious, mildly amused, entirely removed. You look incredible, he said, adjusting his cufflinks, completely unaware that I was dressing for war. Thanks, I replied, dabbing on my final swipe of lipstick. You're going to kill it tonight. He smiled, all teeth and ego. This is it. Everything's finally coming together. He wasn't wrong. Just not in the way he thought. We arrived at the rooftop restaurant 20 minutes early. I'd reserved the private terrace under a fabricated corporate gala, complete with fake signage and printed menus embossed with a fictional consulting firm's logo. Every guest would be told something different about why they were there. My parents thought it was a business networking event. Daniel thought it was a leadership dinner. Susan thought she was tagging along to support her rising star. Gavin was about to see everything. The tables were arranged in a semicircle, giving the illusion of intimacy while providing full visibility for every reaction I wanted to capture. The lighting was warm and flattering, the kind that softens skin and sharpens tension. A string quartet played softly in the background, another intentional layer of polish. No chaos here, only elegance. Until it wasn't. Daniel's actor, our fake executive Bryce, was already there when we arrived. He looked the part perfectly, tailored gray suit, wire-rimmed glasses, clipboard in hand. He shook Daniel's hand firmly, praised his impressive track record, and dropped phrases like strategic scalability and cross-departmental leadership with practiced ease. Daniel lapped it up. "Really appreciate you inviting us," Daniel said as he pulled out a chair for me. Bryce smiled. "I like to see talent in action. You're being considered for something significant. Tonight's just a soft read." Daniel's chest visibly puffed. "You won't be disappointed." One by one, the other guests began arriving. My parents showed up next, my mother in a stiff lavender blazer and pearls, my father already sweating beneath his sports coat. They were confused. My mother glanced around with narrowed eyes as if trying to figure out what game was being played. I greeted them with a kiss on the cheek and said nothing. Susan arrived 15 minutes later, uninvited but not unplanned. Daniel had told her to just swing by, a clear sign of how casual their betrayal had become. She was dressed in a wine-colored dress that fit too tightly for a corporate event, her smile practiced but uncertain. She glanced around as if expecting someone to greet her. No one did. I waved her over casually. "You made it," I said sweetly. Yeah," she said, brushing her hair behind her ear. "Daniel said it was an open event?" "Of course," I replied. "We're all family tonight." And then came Gavin. He entered alone, tall and quiet, wearing a sharp black blazer and a look I couldn't quite read. Hurt, confusion, maybe both. He approached the check-in table where one of my hired staff greeted him with a fabricated name badge and a glass of champagne. Susan hadn't seen him yet. I made sure she wouldn't until it mattered. Dinner began smoothly. Champagne was poured. Polite small talk bloomed and withered in short intervals. Daniel leaned over occasionally to whisper, "This is huge," or "I think he really likes me." I nodded, swirling my wine, waiting for the moment when the temperature in the room would drop. Dessert was served, tiny, elegant tarts, and Bryce stood. "I want to thank everyone for coming," he began, voice steady, commanding. "It's not every day we gather such a wide array of perspectives. As we evaluate candidates for this next leadership tier, integrity is at the core of our consideration. Before we move forward, I like to get a full picture of those I consider." Daniel leaned in. Bryce pulled out his tablet and tapped the screen. The Bluetooth speaker nearby picked up instantly, amplifying his voice as he read. "Friday, 9:42 p.m. Can't stop thinking about you. She's so checked out, it's like I'm already single." A hush fell over the table. Bryce continued, his tone cool, professional. "Saturday, 11:11 p.m. You're dressed tonight." Jesus. I keep picturing it on the floor of that hotel room. Daniel froze. The blood drained from his face. Susan made a strangled noise and reached for her wine glass, knocking it slightly off balance. My mother stiffened. "What is this?" Bryce didn't look at her. He kept reading. "Monday, 2:05 p.m. She's clueless. I could sneak you into the house again next weekend. Just avoid the camera by the den." The final line hit like a gunshot. My father dropped his fork. Susan stared straight ahead, face blank. Daniel was visibly shaking. "What? What the hell is this?" he said, rising halfway out of his seat. "Where are you getting this from?" I stood slowly, placing my napkin on the table. The room turned toward me like a tide. "They're your words, Daniel. Your messages. Your reservations. Your secrets. He looked at me like I had morphed into someone else entirely. You did this? I smiled, calm and lethal. I just held up the mirror. Across the table, Susan finally looked up and saw Gavin. His eyes were locked on hers, empty now. Gavin, she whispered. He stood silent, took a slow sip of champagne, then set the glass down and turned to leave. She stood to follow, her voice desperate now. Wait, please. But he was already gone. I watched him exit without a word. The door shut behind him, and I turned back to my mother. Now that you've helped your son-in-law cheat, I said evenly, I hope you enjoyed the performance. The room didn't know what to do with itself. But I did. I turned, heels clicking against the stone floor, and walked away from the table as the stunned silence cracked into shocked whispers. I didn't rush my steps as I left the table. There was a certain power in walking slowly, letting my heels echo off the marble floor like punctuation marks in a chapter one was choosing to end. I felt eyes on my back, my parents, Daniel, Susan, and the actor still pretending to check his fake notes like this was just another business meeting. The air had shifted. Cracks spread across their carefully manufactured reality, and no one knew where the ground would give way next. But I did. I stopped halfway to the exit and turned around. I'm not done. Every head lifted. Even the servers froze mid-step, sensing the room had morphed into something sacred, like a stage at the moment before the climax, when silence can crush or save a soul. I walked slowly back to the center of the terrace. My fingers didn't shake. My voice didn't tremble. I looked at each of them, letting the weight of everything I had held inside sit visibly on my face. I'm sure most of you are wondering what this was, I said. And why I would go to such lengths. Why I would fake a corporate event. Hire actors. Invite everyone here like we were about to toast to a promotion. Daniel stood abruptly, trying to reclaim control. You're crazy, he snapped, eyes wide with panic. This is deranged. You violated my privacy. This is entrapment or something. Illegal. I met his outburst with a tilt of my head. You want to talk about betrayal and boundaries now, Daniel? That's adorable. He took a breath, puffed his chest, tried again. You have no idea what you've just done. No, Daniel, I replied. You have no idea what I've been doing. While you were busy sneaking Susan through the back door of my parents' house, while you were sending her hotel addresses and telling her how checked out I was listening, watching, gathering. I turned to my parents. My father wouldn't meet my eyes. My mother, still stiff with pride and denial, stared back like I was a stranger. Do you know what it feels like to walk into your own childhood home and realize it's become a love nest for your husband and his mistress? I asked her directly. Do you know what it's like to see the man you married slink out the back door with another woman while your mother sips tea and smiles like it's a garden party? She opened her mouth, but I held up a hand. Save it. You made your choice. You picked loyalty to him over decency to me. And I want you to live with that. Susan made a sound then, small, pathetic. I didn't mean for. I cut her off, sharp. You didn't mean to get caught. Let's be clear. You were fine being the side piece until it got uncomfortable. You knew he was married. You still let him parade you around my family's home like you were something precious instead of someone borrowed. She flinched. We were in love. I laughed, a raw, humorless sound. You weren't in love. You were inconvenience. You were the newest dopamine hit to distract him from the truth. He was never enough on his own. Daniel looked like he wanted to charge toward me, say something, anything, that would swing the story back in his favor. But he couldn't. Not this time. The evidence was laid bare. The masks were off. The carefully groomed image of the loving husband, the supportive in-laws, the bright-eyed coworker, all of it had shattered. And I had handed them the hammer. I turned back to the table where our faux executive Bryce sat with his hands folded politely, as if observing an elaborate play. I gave him a nod of thanks, subtle but meaningful. He would disappear soon, back into anonymity, paid well and sworn to silence. But his role tonight had been essential, just another instrument in this perfectly tuned orchestra. Then I turned my gaze to the room, scanning each face, letting them all feel it. I was never the oblivious wife, I said softly, but with iron in my voice. I was the wife who watched and waited. The one you thought was too busy, too distant, too naive to see what was happening. You mistook silence for ignorance. But silence can be strategy. No one dared move. I stepped away from the center and back toward the edge of the terrace. The city glittered behind me, wide, indifferent, alive. Somewhere out there, people were living their lives, eating dessert, toasting to anniversaries. But here we had burned everything to the ground. And I wasn't sorry. Susan rose to her feet, her eyes brimming. Gavin, he left me. Good, I said without flinching. He deserved better. We both did. Daniel finally collapsed back into his chair, face pale, hands limp in his lap. There was no speech now. No justification. Just the dawning horror of understanding that the control he always thought he had was gone. Forever. I turned to leave. My mother made one last desperate grab for the illusion. You didn't have to destroy him, she said, her voice tight. He made a mistake. I paused in the doorway, letting her words hang for just a moment. I didn't destroy him, I said, not turning back. I just stopped protecting him. And with that, I left. The door clicked softly behind me, final and clean. No applause. Just silence. The kind that settles after an execution. Downstairs, I stepped into the waiting car, the driver I'd hired holding the door open with a nod. I slid into the back seat, the night still clinging to me like smoke, but my spine straight and my chest open for the first time in years. I didn't look back at the restaurant. There was nothing left for me in that room. What I had wanted was never revenge, it was truth. And now it had been spoken. Tomorrow, Daniel would wake up in the ruins of the life he'd tried to build behind my back. And I would wake up free. The morning after the dinner, I woke before dawn, not to the sound of an alarm or the weight of dread, but to silence. The kind that feels clean. I lay in bed for a few minutes, staring at the ceiling, letting the stillness settle into my bones. It was over. No more pretending. No more waiting for the mask to slip. No more bracing for lies hidden in polite smiles. My phone buzzed. Daniel. Daniel, you humiliated me. Call me. Now. I stared at the screen until it dimmed, his name vanishing into black. Another message followed. Daniel, you really think you're the hero in this story? You're not. You're cold. You're impossible to talk to. I made a mistake because you pushed me there. There it was. The classic pivot, twist the knife, then blame the wound on the person bleeding. I didn't respond. I didn't even feel tempted to. I just added the message to the growing collection I had stored in the folder I'd renamed Closure. The next one came an hour later. Daniel, we need to talk. Privately. I think we can work through this if you just calm down and stop acting like a victim. That was the thing about Daniel, he couldn't handle not being in control. He mistook my silence for weakness. My measured response for indecision. He still thought there was a chance to manipulate me back into place. But that version of me was gone. I turned off my phone, walked into the kitchen, made coffee. For the first time in months, I drank it alone without feeling lonely. I watched the sun rise through the window, gold bleeding across the sky, and realized how long it had been since I'd truly seen it. Not through exhaustion, not through worry, but with clarity. By noon, I had new bank accounts set up in my name only. Clean accounts. No access granted to Daniel. I'd already rerouted my direct deposit and canceled the automatic bill payments linked to our joint credit card. Alina, my attorney, had walked me through it step by step. Every move was designed to ensure a clean exit. Daniel wouldn't see a dime of my income again. The house? That was easy. It was in my name. The result of a clever financial decision I'd made years ago, insisting on investing the inheritance from my grandmother solely under my ownership. At the time, Daniel had grumbled about trust and shared resources, but I had stood my ground. And now, that stubbornness had paid off. I walked through each room slowly that day, letting my fingers graze the walls, the bookshelves, the furniture I had chosen piece by piece. These walls had absorbed so many silences, so many polite smiles, so many careful lies. But now they were mine again, truly mine. I could breathe. That night, my phone rang again. My mother. I almost didn't answer. But some part of me, maybe the part still foolish enough to believe in something resembling love, pressed accept. Her voice was sharp. How dare you embarrass him like that? My breath caught. You're seriously calling to defend him? He's your husband, she snapped. Marriage isn't supposed to be perfect. Sometimes men make mistakes. I laughed. A bitter, tired sound. Mistakes? He didn't forget our anniversary, Mom. He brought his mistress into your house. You knew. You helped him lie. She huffed. I didn't help. I just didn't interfere. Same thing, I said, cold now. You were complicit. He told me you'd changed, she continued. That you didn't care anymore. You were always working, always traveling, always so distant. What was he supposed to do? I swallowed the heat rising in my chest. He was supposed to talk to me. Or leave me. But not cheat. And certainly not with your passive blessing. You're being dramatic. No, I said, my voice like steel. I'm being done. She went quiet for a moment. Then, softly, you didn't have to destroy him like that. In front of everyone. You embarrassed yourself. I nearly laughed again, but this time there was sadness laced inside it. You still don't get it. That dinner wasn't about revenge. It was about truth. And I chose to tell it in front of everyone who needed to hear it. She muttered something about shame and reputation, but I was already pulling the phone from my ear. I let her voice trail off as I hung up. Then I blocked her number. Daniel's came next. I blocked him too. There was nothing left to discuss. The next few days passed with an eerie sort of calm. My legal team filed the official divorce petition. The documentation was airtight: infidelity, misuse of marital funds, emotional distress. I had everything: messages, video, voice memos, receipts. I didn't even need to go to trial. Alina was confident he'd cave before it ever got that far. She was right. Within a week, Daniel's attorney reached out, offering to forego his share of the house if I agreed to a quiet, uncontested divorce. I agreed. On one condition: I got everything tied to our joint accounts. Savings, stocks, even the points on the credit card. He hesitated, then relented. He had no leverage left. I signed the final papers in a marble office on the 10th floor of a building that smelled like old money and cold victory. Alina slid the copies across the table toward me, and I signed them with a pen that didn't tremble in my grip. It was over. Legally, financially, emotionally. I stepped outside into the late afternoon sun and exhaled, long and slow, like I was finally allowed to. That night, I lit a candle in the bedroom and let soft jazz play from my speakers. I poured a glass of wine and sat on the floor, staring at the flickering flame. No one texted. No one asked where I was. And for once, I wasn't waiting for anyone to arrive. It was quiet. It was mine. And it was enough. The apartment I moved into sat on the 12th floor of a downtown high-rise, with wide windows that overlooked the city like it owed me an apology. It was modern, open, quiet, nothing like the house I'd shared with Daniel. No shared closets. No lingering scents in the sheets. No shadows pressed into the floorboards. Just clean lines, tall ceilings, and a view that reminded me I had chosen this new altitude. I didn't decorate right away. I brought only the essentials: clothes, books, my laptop, the ceramic mug I loved too much to leave behind. At first, the space felt hollow. Every sound echoed. My footsteps, the kettle boiling, the rustle of bedsheets as I turned over alone at night. But in that emptiness, something unexpected stirred. Peace. I could move through each room without flinching. No more flares of panic when I heard a phone buzz. No more half-held breath when I entered the kitchen, wondering if Daniel would be there with a new excuse or another lie. I was alone, and I was finally safe. I started therapy the week after I moved in. Dr. Leone was calm and unassuming, with a soft voice and sharp eyes that saw too much too fast. In our first session, I sat across from her and said, "I don't want to fall apart. I want to rebuild." She smiled, nodding gently. Falling apart and rebuilding aren't separate things. One is the beginning of the other. I hated how much that made sense. Each week, we peeled back layers. Not just the betrayal, but the years that led to it. The quiet compromises. The moments I chose silence over confrontation. The way I'd been conditioned to believe my needs were second to his comfort, my success a threat instead of a shared win. There's a part of you that was taught to minimize your own suffering, Dr. Leone said once, to stay agreeable, composed, even when someone was tearing you apart. She wasn't wrong. But I was unlearning that. Slowly, one night I found myself unable to sleep. My mind kept circling the events of the last few months, not with pain, but with a strange, simmering power. I opened my laptop and began typing not for anyone else, just for myself at first. The words came like a flood. When they burn your life down, don't reach for a fire extinguisher. Let it blaze. Watch it reduce to ash. Then gather what's left and build something beautiful. That first entry turned into a second, then a third. And before I knew it, I had launched an anonymous blog, Ashes and Aftermath. I never used names. Never mentioned Daniel or Susan or even my own. But I told the truth. I wrote about betrayal and silence and survival. About what it means to stand in the middle of your own broken life and choose not to be bitter, but better. Within weeks, people started reading. A handful of comments appeared under each post. Then dozens. Then hundreds. Women. Men. People of all ages who saw themselves in the words I had barely been brave enough to share. They wrote things like, "I thought I was alone. Your words gave me permission to leave. Thank you for showing that healing doesn't have to be quiet." The community grew, and with it, a new kind of connection. Not with liars or users, but with survivors. People who knew the terrain of heartbreak and had the audacity to believe in something after it. One rainy Saturday, I wandered into a bookstore tucked between two office buildings downtown. I wasn't looking for anything. Just shelter. A distraction. I moved slowly between the shelves, running my fingers over spines, letting the scent of paper and quiet occupy my senses. I didn't notice the man beside me at first, until he picked up the same novel I had been eyeing. "You've read this?" he asked, holding it up. I glanced at the title. The Art of Starting Over. I smiled, amused. That's either a terrible question or the most ironic one you could ask me. He laughed. It was a warm sound. Real. Guess I'm batting 50-50 then. He wasn't flashy. No cologne-soaked arrogance. Just jeans, a sweater, and kind eyes that didn't dart toward my body or scan me for weaknesses. We ended up sitting in the store's tiny cafe, trading stories about books that made us cry and the cities we wanted to live in someday. His name was Elliot. He didn't ask for my number. He just said, "If you're ever back here on a rainy Saturday, I'd like to keep talking." It wasn't a spark. Not yet. More like a soft knock on a door I thought I had sealed shut. I wasn't ready to open it, but I didn't hate hearing it. Back home, I wrote a blog post titled, "The Quiet Kind of Brave." It was about sitting across from someone new and not expecting betrayal. About how healing isn't loud or linear, it's slow. Gentle. A choice you make again and again when you want to shut down but don't. That night, I sat by the window with the city lights, blinking like distant stars. I wrapped myself in a blanket, held my favorite mug between my palms, and allowed myself to smile, not because everything was perfect, but because I wasn't pretending anymore. I was rebuilding. On my own terms. The world didn't stop turning when Daniel fell. It never does, not for broken marriages, not for betrayals, and certainly not for the men who think they'll never have to answer for what they've done. But slowly, and then all at once, his carefully built image began to crumble. Word spread within his industry like wildfire. It wasn't just the public humiliation at the dinner, though that alone had raised eyebrows. No, it was the quiet, strategic release of the screenshots. The whispers that circulated in private Slack channels. The way his name slowly began disappearing from scheduled conferences, from invites, from the lips of colleagues who once fawned over him. Susan dumped him 2 weeks later. I didn't hear about it from Daniel, of course. I heard it from an old coworker who'd seen Susan crying in a parking lot, shouting something about being used, and how could he choose her over me and still end up with nothing? Apparently, Daniel had spiraled after losing the job offer he'd been so sure was real. He tried to save face, but the whispers were louder than his explanations. His name became synonymous with risk. And people avoid risk in business. By the time spring rolled around, Daniel had lost his job, his reputation, and whatever illusion of power he had clung to. He was radioactive now, too well-dressed for pity, too publicly shamed for support. And I was blooming. The blog had taken on a life of its own. What started as anonymous reflections now carried weight. Emails poured in daily, stories from people across the world, survivors of heartbreak and betrayal, people rebuilding their lives from splinters and ashes. They called me brave. I didn't always feel it, but I kept writing anyway. My apartment had filled out now, plants, soft lighting, shelves lined with books, and little artifacts from a life lived with intention. No longer did I fill rooms just to keep from feeling lonely. I liked my space. I liked my silence. I liked myself. So when the wedding invitation arrived in the mail, one addressed not to Daniel and me, but just to me, I almost laughed. Not because of who it was from, but because of what it represented. My cousin. The one my mother had always loved to compare me to. Grace is softer, she'd say. She listens more. I hadn't spoken to Grace since the divorce, not because of anything personal, but because the family line had fractured cleanly down the middle, and I'd stepped away from the whole rotten mess. But curiosity got the better of me. I went. I wore a deep green dress, understated and elegant. I didn't bring a date. I didn't need armor. I sat alone, sipped champagne, and smiled when people whispered. Because they always whisper. They just don't realize I'm always listening. My mother found me near the dessert table, like she'd been waiting for a quiet moment to strike. She hadn't changed much, still rigid, still impeccably dressed, still wearing that expression like she was appraising an item at auction. "You look thinner," she said, like it was a compliment. I didn't offer a response. She sipped her drink, her eyes narrowing. "You didn't have to destroy him, you know." I turned to face her fully. "Excuse me?" She leaned in slightly, voice low, almost conspiratorial. "Daniel. He made mistakes. But you didn't just leave, you burned him down. Do you feel better now? Was the spectacle worth it?" I stared at her, stunned by the audacity. And then I smiled. Calm. Cold. Controlled. "You think I destroyed him?" I said softly. "No. I didn't destroy him. I just stopped protecting him." She flinched. Because she knew it was true. Every time I'd made excuses for him. Every time I let something slide for the sake of peace. Every time I stayed silent so the people around me didn't have to feel uncomfortable. I had been the shield. The filter. The fixer. And when I stopped, he fell apart. She looked away, and for the first time, I saw it, not shame. Not regret. Just disappointment. Not that Daniel cheated. Not that she failed to defend her daughter. But that I had dared to defy the script. That I'd broken the family pattern of keeping quiet and enduring. I didn't wait for her to speak again. I turned and walked away, my heels clicking against the floor, echoing like the last notes of a song only I had memorized. That night, I sat at my desk, the city glittering behind me like it had so many nights before, and opened my laptop. There was one last story I needed to write. The final blog post. I let my fingers hover over the keys, breathing in the stillness, the certainty, the weight of everything I had lived through. And then I began to type. When they burn your life down, build a castle from the ashes. I wrote about the girl who thought love meant sacrifice. About the woman who swallowed her voice so others wouldn't feel small. About the wife who watched her marriage collapse in her parents' backyard. And about the version of her who rose anyway. I wrote every word not for vengeance, but for liberation. When I finished, I read it once, then twice. No edits. No hesitation. Then I hit publish. I closed the laptop gently and leaned back in my chair, staring out into the city that had become my witness. The past no longer owned me. I wasn't a victim. I wasn't bitter. I was something else now. Free,